I was at a dinner recently where I sat across from an environmental consultant who seemed genuinely heartbroken. He spent nearly 20 minutes describing the nesting habits of the reddish egret in South Texas, his voice heavy with a kind of hushed religious reverence. To him, those few hectares of tidal flats were a fragile line of defense against what he called the noise of ego. He spoke about the Earth as if it were a patient in hospice, and any attempt at expansion was just a cruel disturbance of its final peace. But then the topic shifted to the restart of the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant and the gutting of the NRC's regulatory red tape. The change in his demeanor was jarring. The sorrow vanished, replaced by a sharp, cold defensiveness. He didn't cite radiation levels or waste protocols. Instead, he dropped this bizarre line. Energy shouldn't be too cheap to meter. If people have that much power, they'll stop listening to the experts. That moment, the sudden pivot from protecting birds to protecting the status of scarcity, made me realize that his concern wasn't about ecology at all. It was a commitment to manage decline. He was a diesel in the purest sense, someone who views the second law of thermodynamics as an enemy to be negotiated with, rather than a force to be harnessed. What he doesn't realize is that the negotiation is over. From the nuclear-powered AI clusters to the routine recovery of Starship, the great thaw of 2025 has begun. The narrative of risk aversion is fracturing, and for the first time in 50 years, the architects of abundance are the ones holding the blueprints. We are no longer asking for permission to build the future. We are simply watching the old defensive perimeters collapse. This isn't a continuation of the status quo. It is the beginning of the iron and fire renaissance. That opening thought really it just perfectly captures this incredibly high-stakes philosophical battle that's really crystallized this year.
It really does. It's an aggressive thesis, no question.
Very aggressive. The idea that this half century of risk aversion is being deliberately, dismantled. We've been looking at how this iron and fire renaissance, this real commitment to abundance, is taking shape across 3 huge strategic frontiers.
And our mission for this deep dive is to really walk you through those 3 areas where, as the piece says, the established perimeters are collapsing.
Exactly. So first, we're going to explore this push for what's being called energy superabundance and how that's being driven by, regulatory warfare and the insane demands of AI.
Then we'll look at the second frontier, the annexing of space, this idea of relentless industrialization beyond Earth.
And finally, the third, and maybe the most personal, the pursuit of biological sovereignty, actually rewriting human biology.
It's a huge agenda. And, going back to that word aggressive, it's an aggressive thesis, but when you actually dig into the policy, the executive orders, the tech breakthroughs, the evidence is, frankly, really compelling.
Compelling that the negotiation is over.
That's it. What we're seeing is the policy, the entire infrastructure, finally being forced to catch up to what's technologically possible, especially in energy.
And the goal isn't just like a little bit more efficiency.
Oh, not at all. The stated goal is not incremental improvement. It is, and this is the term they use, overwhelming dominance in our generation capacity.
So we're talking about moving civilization from gigawatts to terawatts.
Exactly. A totally different scale of power.
Okay, let's unpack that first piece then, this thermodynamic imperative. Because you're right, nothing else works without energy. Space, AI, longevity, it all starts with power.
It all starts with power.
And the consensus now is that gigawatts just aren't going to cut it anymore. We need terawatts. And this push for overwhelming energy dominance is being driven by these regulatory shifts right alongside the just ravenous energy demands of AI.
And that's the key. For decades, the choke point, the real bottleneck, wasn't the nuclear technology itself.
Right. It was never the science.
Never the science. It was the bureaucracy. A bureaucracy that was, in many ways, designed specifically to prevent it from scaling quickly.
Which brings us to the administrative gutting of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC, in 2025. That is framed as a strategic bypass of a captured institution.
It is. And that's not just a simple policy tweak, It was a direct political assault on what they're calling the artificial energy ceiling.
So let's get into the mechanics of that strategic bypass. How does a philosophical shift like that actually become, administrative reality? How did they target the NRC?
It really began with executive action, an executive order that essentially directed the NRC to fully and quickly implement the reforms that were mandated by the Advance Act 2024.
Now, the Advance Act was already about improving licensing efficiency, but this went further.
Much, much further. The executive interpretation was extremely aggressive. The core goal was to dismantle the precautionary principle, which has been the bedrock of regulation for 50 years.
And just for everyone listening, the precautionary principle, that's basically the idea that unless you can prove with absolute certainty that there is zero harm, the project stops.
Precisely. It puts the burden of proof on the innovator to prove a negative, which is, often an impossible hurdle for new tech. It assumes risk until safety is exhaustively proven.
So what are they replacing it with?
It's being replaced with a performance-based framework. It's a huge shift. In this new system, regulators focus on measuring and verifying actual operational performance against specific measurable safety metrics.
So things like dose limits, structural integrity.
Exactly. Real-world data, not endless, front-loaded hypothetical risk scenarios that could stall a project for a decade. The stated intent is to let innovation outpace bureaucracy.
To make regulation performance-driven, not prevention-driven.
You've got it. It's a total philosophical reversal.
But a philosophy is one thing. The sources say there were structural changes to make sure this actually happened on time.
Absolutely. Speed was everything. The timeline they mandated for these revisions was, frankly, insane. The notices of proposed rulemaking were due by February 23, 2026.
That is a breakneck pace for a federal agency.
Unheard of. And the final rules, the entire guidance package, that has to be done no later than November 23, 2026. Less than 2 years from start to finish. It just shows this was a non-negotiable push for speed.
And the NRC wasn't doing this alone. They were given a new partner, the Department of Governmental Efficiency, DOGE.
Right. I mean, the name itself tells you everything you need to know about its mission.
So what was DOGE's actual role in this?
DOGE was positioned as the institutional enforcer of this acceleration. The executive order mandated that the NRC work directly with DOGE to find efficiency gains, and that includes reducing overall NRC staffing.
And redeploying people, right?
Crucially, yes. Redeploying personnel specifically to support these new expedited reactor licensing initiatives.
So DOGE is basically an internal management consultant with teeth, whose only job is to make sure the NRC not only changes its rules, but physically reorients its entire structure toward acceleration.
That's a great way to put it.
Is that even legal? I mean, isn't the NRC an independent body?
It is, and that's the controversial part. But by directing it to cooperate with DOGE to hit efficiency targets and staff reductions, the executive branch is applying immense direct pressure on its operations.
So the political message is clear: adapt or be made irrelevant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
DOGE's existence signals that the NRC's role has shifted from being a gatekeeper to being an accelerator.
And that structural change leads us right to the actual hardware, the deployment strategy. If the bureaucracy is being forced to speed up, what are we actually deploying? The focus is heavily on small modular reactors, or SMRs. They're called the infantry of this campaign.
The focus on SMRs is it's a masterstroke in scaling. They solve the two biggest problems with traditional nuclear plants,
Which are the massive upfront cost and the decades-long construction times.
Right. SMRs are designed to be factory built. They are inherently scalable through mass production, just like a car or an airplane. This completely changes the economics.
So you're not building a bespoke, multi-billion-dollar fortress on-site for 15 years. You're getting a standardized unit shipped from a factory.
Exactly. And these units are flexible. You can transform a site into a 500 milliwary fortress of baseload power relatively quickly. They're the standardized, rapidly deployable modules you need to even begin thinking about moving from gigawatts to terawatts.
And the Department of Energy, the DOE, they're not just watching this happen. They're actively getting involved, expanding their own mandate.
That's the other critical piece of this. Under a separate executive order, 13301, the DOE is reforming its own reactor testing framework to accelerate the next generation of nuclear tech.
How are they doing that?
This is where it gets really interesting. The DOE is basically expanding its jurisdiction. It's declaring that any advanced reactor under its sufficient control that is not producing commercial electric power is its domain.
So wait, they're creating a fast lane that bypasses the full years-long NRC commercial licensing process for any reactor that's just for testing or internal use.
That is the precise mechanism. It allows designers to build, iterate, and test their advanced reactor concepts without that decade of regulatory scrutiny you'd need for a full commercial plant.
And they're streamlining the process internally as well.
Yes. The order instructs the DOE to create a dedicated team to help applicants through this new process and, most aggressively, to expedite the testing itself.
What's the timeline on that? Because speed seems to be the one constant here.
The mandate is incredibly ambitious. A qualified test reactor has to be safely operational within 2 years of submitting a substantially complete application.
2 years. That's down from what, 5, 7, maybe 10 years previously?
Easily. It signals that the government now sees regulatory efficiency not just a nice thing to have, but as a core strategic asset. Every day you save in testing is a day you gain in the race for energy dominance.
A race for what? Which brings us to the AI nuclear symbiosis. We're not just talking about powering the grid anymore. We're seeing major tech companies engineering a direct relationship with fission.
This is the real definition of convergence.
Yeah.
Tech giants, the Microsofts, the Amazons, they're realizing that the public grid is a liability for them.
A supply risk.
A huge supply risk and a huge cost instability.
Yeah.
So they're moving to integrate their massive data centers directly with dedicated fission sources. And the most symbolic example of this is the restart of 3 Mile Island Unit 1.
I mean, the symbolism there is just off the charts. The site that basically halted the nuclear industry for a generation is now being restarted. To feed what?
To feed a 1.2 gigawatt AI training cluster.
1.2 gigawatts. For one computer.
For one computational goal. It's not powering a city, it's powering an algorithm. This is the perfect illustration of where petaflops need terawatt hours, where massive continuous computation demands its own dedicated nuclear plant.
But why does an AI need that much power continuously? What on earth are they doing with a computational leviathan of that size?
It's not running chatbots. The strategic purpose is very high-level physics and engineering. They're running billion-parameter simulations to solve some of the deepest problems that are currently bottlenecking our expansion as a species.
Such as?
Things like solving quantum chromodynamics problems, which is fundamental for creating new materials.
Yeah.
Optimizing the incredibly complex designs for tokamaks, which are, essential for magnetic confinement fusion.
They're trying to crack fusion.
Exactly, cracking the plasma containment problems that we need to solve to finally achieve net positive fusion energy.
So the relationship is totally symbiotic. AI is driving this insane demand for more and more power.
Right.
And at the same time, it's the essential tool we need to solve the science, to unlock the next level of power.
It is a closed-loop acceleration model. It's the thermodynamic imperative amplified by artificial intelligence. The more power AI uses, the more incentive there is to build advanced reactors. The more computing power we have, the faster we solve the fundamental science of energy itself.
And the end goal is just non-negotiable.
Non-negotiable. Energy superabundance.
It's easy to get lost in these, huge strategic terms, but this all becomes very human when you see how it affects people on the ground. This is where that story about Sarah, the technician in the Rust Belt, really hits home.
Right.
She's in a town that's just been forgotten for decades, a perfect example of what she called managed decline. The old coal stacks are just sitting there, cold. And then, because of these fast-tracked reforms, an SMR gets approved for her county to power a new data center.
And it just changes everything for them.
Completely. She said it arrived in sections, like a huge high-tech kit. And when they turned it on, the deep, constant hum of the town, for the first time in her life, didn't sound like a death rattle. It sounded like a pulse.
That's a powerful image.
It is, because for her community, this thermodynamic imperative isn't some abstract physics concept. It's the return of heat, of jobs, of a future. It really highlights the contrast between the stagnant economy of safety at all costs and the tangible promise of abundance.
And that visceral connection between energy and human expansion leads us directly into the second strategic area, space. Because you can't get off the planet without an immense amount of energy.
Right. The energy to lift mass out of Earth's gravity well is step one. And the ideological shift here is just as big. We're moving from a conservationist mindset, protecting Earth from us, to the view that Earth is, and this is a quote, a cradle meant to be left behind.
That opening story about the environmental consultant and the reddish egret really sets the stage for this conflict, doesn't it?
It's the perfect example. That federal land exchange that allowed SpaceX to expand in South Texas wasn't just a real estate deal. It was a landmark ideological victory. The victory of what the materials call accelerationist pragmatism over sentimentalist preservationism.
It's a conflict of scale. The traditional argument is focused on the local. A few hectares of tidal flats for one species of bird.
Which is a valid concern in isolation.
Of course. But the accelerationist counter-argument is that protecting a local ecosystem gets deprioritized when it's weighed against achieving a pathway to the stars for humanity. They frame that as the only way to avoid planetary-scale suicide.
The logic is harsh, but it's clear. If Earth is our only basket, we're one asteroid or supervolcano away from total extinction. Multi-planetary expansion becomes the ultimate form of species conservation.
Exactly. It's a consequentialist moral calculus applied at a planetary scale.
And to show that this is actually possible now, we have to talk about the one metric that defines this whole new era, mass to orbit, MTO. This is where the hard numbers just shatter the old models of risk and cost.
MTO is everything. It's the key performance indicator of our spacefaring capability. And the successful recovery of Starship on its 9th integrated flight, that was the moment everything changed. It proved the economic model of full reusability was real.
And before that, the cost was just prohibitive for any large-scale industrialization.
Prohibitive is an understatement. On Falcon 9, which is the most efficient rocket ever built before Starship, you were looking at around $10,000 to get 1 kilogram into orbit.
But the projections after the Starship recovery show a complete collapse of that cost.
It's not a drop, it's a phase change. A projected cost trajectory is now heading towards about $100 per kilogram.
From 10,000 to 100, that's a 99% reduction.
99%. It's a number that's hard to wrap your head around. But what it means is that for the first time in history, space industrialization is economically viable. It's why the concept is now framed as annexing space, not just exploring it.
So when it's that cheap to get to orbit, what's the goal? What do you do with that capability?
The goal shifts from pure science and exploration to resource utilization and large-scale manufacturing. The first off-planet factories won't be making souvenirs. They'll be highly automated facilities manufacturing enormous solar power satellites.
And building them with materials from the moon and asteroids.
Exactly, using in situ resources. And their whole purpose is to beam terawatts of clean, continuous power back down to Earth. This is how the Space Industrial Zone, launching from Boca Chica, ties directly back to that thermodynamic imperative we started with.
It's an incredible vision, but this rush to annex space, using policies that prioritize extraction above all else, it raises some serious red flags. Are we just going to repeat the same mistakes we made on Earth overuse, ownership conflicts, pollution, but on a cosmic scale?
That's the major concern that comes up. The current U.S. regulatory framework, particularly the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act, the CSLCA, and the Artemis Accords, it's all built to prioritize extraction. And the language it uses is almost identical to historical policies like the rule of capture.
Let's break down the ownership part first. This idea of a split estate in space. The CSLCA gives U.S. citizens the right to possess, own, transport, use, and sell any resource they get from space.
Correct. But the legal tension there is with the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which explicitly prohibits national appropriation of outer space.
So how does the U.S. get around that?
The legal argument is that extracting and owning the resources, the minerals, does not inherently constitute national appropriation of the celestial body itself.
So just to make sure I'm getting this right for you listening, it's like saying you can own the oil under a piece of land, but you don't own the land itself. That's the legal loophole.
That is the exact legal loophole. It's the classic split estate problem from mining history on Earth, where the surface rights and the mineral rights are separate. And it has already created a huge amount of international conflict.
Before a single ton of asteroid has even been mined.
It's incredible. Russia, in particular, responded very sharply to the Artemis Accords. Their space agency publicly accused the U.S. of trying to expropriate outer space and planning to actually take over other planets. We've started a mineral rights dispute over rocks that are still floating millions of miles away.
And beyond just who owns it, there's the problem of overuse, which is baked into the rule of capture language in the CSLCA. It tells the government to discourage barriers to development.
And that language is a direct philosophical echo of the terrestrial rule of capture. It's first come, first serve. So the first company to extract the resource owns it. This incentivizes a mad dash, a gold rush, with no thought for long-term sustainability.
And the math on this, even on a cosmic scale, is pretty sobering.
It is. The models show that even if the space economy just grows at the historical average of the global economy, about 3.5%, we'd have maybe 400 years before resource exhaustion becomes a serious problem, and then only 60 years after that until it's a crisis.
But the whole point of this iron and fire renaissance is that growth won't be 3.5%. It's going to be much, much faster.
Precisely. If the space economy grows at, say, 10% or more, which is consistent with past industrial booms, that timeline shrinks dramatically. We could be looking at a resource crisis in the next century. The push for immediate abundance risks creating a new cosmic scale scarcity down the road.
And finally, there's debris. We seem poised to create a massive landfill in the sky.
Our current debris policies are completely outdated for this new industrial age. The NASA standards only require evaluation for debris larger than 5 millimeters that stays in orbit for more than 25 years.
5 millimeters, which at orbital velocity is basically a bullet.
A catastrophic bullet. And the standard method for disposal is just to push dead satellites into a higher storage orbit. It's not a solution. It's just kicking the can down the road.
A graveyard orbit.
Literally a graveyard. The European Space Agency estimates there are already over 131 million pieces of debris larger than a millimeter up there. We're accumulating a massive hazard that threatens to make low Earth orbit unusable for future generations.
I want to circle back to the human side of this, to the story of Elena, the former conservationist who lives near Boca Chica.
Her story really captures this ideological pivot. She talked about feeling the expansion as a literal physical vibration every time they test an engine. The environmentalism she knew, focused on local preservation, was just being steamrolled by this new vision of Earth as a launch pad.
And she had to make a choice.
She did. Her personal pivot was accepting the sacrifice of the local ecosystem of the reddish egret as a necessary secondary cost to ensuring the long-term survival of the human species on a multi-planetary scale.
It's that zero-sum game again, the cost of planetary suicide versus the cost of a few hectares of tidal flats. And this renaissance is explicitly choosing escape velocity.
Which brings us to the third and maybe the most profound frontier of all, our own biology.
Right. If you're going to have energy superabundance and become a multi-planetary species, then the natural limits of the human body aging, disease, a short lifespan, they become the final unacceptable bottleneck.
And the shift here is from seeing biology as our destiny to seeing it as, and I love this phrase, legacy code that is subject to a forced upgrade.
It's a hacker's mentality applied to life itself.
And this field has seen paradigm-shattering breakthroughs this year. Specifically, the 2025 Cell paper that demonstrated robust epigenetic reprogramming in primates. This isn't just a new drug. It's being described as a root access exploit into the aging operating system.
Root access. That's a powerful analogy. But for it to make sense, you have to understand the theory they're exploiting. The information theory of aging, or ITOA.
ITOA is the key.
Yeah.
It's this idea that aging isn't primarily caused by, just simple wear and tear or genetic mutations. It's caused by the accumulation of epigenetic noise. Right. It's a loss of information.
So the idea is the genome, our DNA, is like perfect software. But the epigenome, the operating system that tells the genes what to do and when, it gets corrupted over time. Like a hard drive getting data errors.
That's the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
The youthful blueprint, the software, is still there, intact, but the cell's ability to read it correctly gets garbled. So reprogramming is literally the process of telling the cell to restore from its backup.
And the tool to do that, the reset signal, involves the Yamanaka factors.
Yes. The 4 transcription factors, OSKM, as they're known, are the key. When you express all 4 of them fully, they can turn any adult cell back into an embryonic stem cell. A complete blank slate.
Which sounds great until you realize that a cell that's lost its identity and is just growing uncontrollably is, well, cancer. A teratoma.
And that's been the huge problem for years. But the breakthrough is partial reprogramming, also called RIR. The goal here is to just transiently express these factors, turn them on for a short time, long enough to reset the cell's biological clock, but not so long that it loses its identity and becomes cancerous.
Finding that perfect therapeutic window.
Exactly. And the successes in animal models are what prove this window actually exists.
What are some of the key examples? What shows this is moving from theory to reality?
Well, the results are pretty dramatic. In mice with progeria, which is like accelerated aging, transient expression of these factors extended their lifespan and ameliorated the aging symptoms. In normal aged mice, it restored youthful DNA methylation patterns, literally reversing their epigenetic age.
So that's turning back the clock itself. What about restoring actual function?
That's the most exciting part. It's been shown to restore vision in aged mice and, incredibly, to induce heart regeneration after a heart attack by pushing adult heart cells back into a neonatal regenerative state.
You're resetting them to a functional fetal state.
In essence, yes. And the fact that you can reverse the epigenetic clock and restore physiological function at the same time is what validates the view that this is the most promising approach for human rejuvenation.
And the moment that potential was validated, the money followed. The capital flowing into this rejuvenation biotech sector is just enormous.
The capital flow proves this is being taken seriously as the next major strategic market. You have companies like Altos Labs with a reported $3 billion effort focused solely on this. You have Calico, AsiaX, Turn Biotechnologies.
And Turn is using mRNA cocktails, right? Leveraging the tech from the pandemic.
Exactly. Using that platform to deliver these reprogramming factors without having to permanently alter the genome with a virus. It's a much safer approach.
And this massive flood of capital and new science is colliding head-on with the old regulatory system, which has led to this really sharp critique of what's being called bioethical safetyism.
The critique is that the FDA's traditional pathway, 12 years and over $2 billion to approve a new drug, is not just slow. It's an economic and humanitarian disaster when you apply it to a universal condition like aging. The term being used is the invisible graveyard.
That is some heavy language. What does that mean, the invisible graveyard?
It refers to the number of lives, measured in person years, that are lost due to bureaucratic delay. If you believe aging is a treatable disease, which is the core premise here, then every year an effective treatment is held up. Millions of people suffer and die from things that could have been prevented.
So the argument is that the regulatory system itself becomes complicit in premature death through inaction.
That's the accelerationist position, yes. Which is why tools like epigenetic clocks are so critical to this whole movement.
Because they give you an objective metric.
A fast, objective metric. Clocks like Horvath's or Greenwich, they can accurately measure your biological age based on your DNA methylation patterns. They turn your biological status into a hard number.
So instead of a clinical trial that has to wait 20 years to see if people live longer,
right,
you can run a trial for 6 months and see if the intervention took 5 years off their biological clock.
Exactly. It provides the rapid feedback loop you need to accelerate the research.
So the science is there, the money is there, we have the tools to measure it. What are the big engineering hurdles left to get this from mice and primates into humans?
It really comes down to two main challenges: safety, specifically avoiding cancer, and delivery, getting it to all the cells in the body.
Let's talk about safety first. The MYC factor is a known oncogene, right?
It's a powerful proto-oncogene, yes.
Yeah.
That's the main risk. You need incredibly tight dosage control to get the rejuvenation effect without causing the cell to become cancerous. It's a very, very narrow therapeutic window, especially when you're talking about a treatment for the whole organism.
And then there's the delivery problem. How do you get these factors everywhere?
Traditionally, you'd use a viral vector, like an AAV. But they have their own safety concerns, the risk of integrating into the wrong part of the genome off-target effects, and critically, they tend to accumulate in the liver.
So you don't get even full body distribution.
Right, which makes full body rejuvenation very difficult. And that's why the search for chemical alternatives is so intense right now.
Looking for small molecules? A pill you can take.
That's the holy grail. Compounds that can be taken orally and modify the epigenome chemically, without any of the risks of gene therapy.
What kind of chemicals are we talking about?
Two main classes. First, things that strip away the excess DNA methylation that builds up with age, like 5-azacitidine. Second, compounds that modify the histone proteins that the DNA is wound around, like sodium butyrate, which basically makes it easier for the cell to read its youthful genes again.
So using simple chemistry to achieve the same informational reset as complex gene therapy.
That's the optimistic view. If the epigenome really is the master regulator, then we will eventually develop technologies to make medicine programmable.
To put a face on all this, I want to bring in the story of David, the man in one of the early epigenetic reprogramming trials. He's 65, and he talked about his body not as a temple, but as software that had finally received a critical patch he called traditional medicine, where you just treat one disease after another until you die, prolonged torture.
Wow.
For him, this wasn't just about curing one thing. It was about rejecting the entire premise that aging is a necessary or natural part of life. His experience of feeling his biological clock literally being rewritten is, I think, a really powerful counterargument to the fear of this kind of progress.
David's story really gets to the core philosophy of this whole movement. The moment you reframe biological decay as a technical fault instead of your destiny, the push to aggressively engineer a solution becomes a moral imperative.
So we've laid out these three incredible frontiers: energy, space, and biology. Let's tie it all together and talk about the fundamental conflict that's driving this iron and fire renaissance. The schism between abundance and what's being called safetyism.
Before we get to the philosophy, we should just touch on the sheer economic scale of what's at stake here, especially with longevity. The numbers are almost unbelievable.
You're talking about the value of targeting aging itself rather than just individual diseases.
Exactly. When you treat cancer, maybe you add a few years to a person's life before they get dementia or heart disease. You're just treating the symptom.
But if you treat the root cause aging, the returns are exponential.
They are. Conservative economic models estimate that slowing aging by just 1 year is worth $38 trillion to the global economy.
38 trillion.
And if you slow it by 10 years, that number balloons to $367 trillion.
It's hard to even wrap your head around a number that big. This isn't just a healthcare policy, it's a complete rewrite of global economics.
It is. It creates a virtuous circle. People stay healthier longer, they're more productive for longer, which generates more wealth and innovation, which then funds the next round of rejuvenation tech. The economic case for this is overwhelming.
And this incredible potential has really solidified the two opposing ideological camps.
It has. On one side, you have the philosophy of effective altruism, or EA. And as it's described here, this group has a paralyzing focus on highly speculative, long-term existential risks, X risks.
Things like runaway AI, that kind of thing.
Right. Low probability but high impact events. And this focus often leads to what its critics call a doomsday cult of inaction. Their primary strategy is preservation, hitting the pause button.
In contrast to that, you have effective accelerationism, or E, which is the philosophy that's really underwriting this entire renaissance.
And E completely rejects the idea that inaction is the safer path. They embrace risk as the unavoidable cost of progress and evolution. They argue that the real risk is stagnation.
So while an EA proponent might be focused on running simulations to make sure AI is safe in 100 years,
an ETH proponent is focused on building the nuclear plants to power the AI that can solve our problems right now, like aligning asteroid trajectories for in-space manufacturing.
It's a fundamental difference in priorities, action versus caution.
Exactly. The core belief of each Verban is that the universe rewards power, intelligence, and expansion, and the only way to solve big existential risks is through aggressive technological advancement.
But with that much aggressive expansion, with overturning all these safety paradigms, there are, of course, enormous ethical challenges. We can't ignore those.
Responsible governance is absolutely critical precisely because these technologies are so powerful. And the most immediate, most obvious challenge is inequality.
Right. Longevity treatments, at least at first, are going to be incredibly expensive. This risks creating a world with a biological class system.
A world of the long-lived and the short-lived. And that would completely undermine the whole promise of a renaissance for civilization. If this new era of abundance is only for a few, it's not a renaissance. It's a new form of feudalism.
So the argument has to be that the pursuit of healthy longevity is a fundamental human right, not a luxury good.
It has to be. The goal can't be to slow down the science. It has to be to build a governance framework that speeds up the science while ensuring equitable access for everyone.
I think at the end of the day, the data is just undeniable. The bureaucratic breaks from the NRC to the FDA, they are being structurally and deliberately released, and civilization's expansion index, for lack of a better term, is responding.
The Great Thaw has absolutely begun. We're seeing a fundamental restructuring of our relationship with energy, with space, and with our own biology.
The old narrative of scarcity, of managed decline, it's fracturing under the relentless pressure of these breakthroughs. From nuclear-powered AI clusters to the routine recovery of Starship to the rewriting of the human genome.
The old defensive perimeters are collapsing because for the first time in 50 years, the people who want to build, the architects of abundance, are the ones holding the blueprints.
This is not a continuation of the status quo. It is something new, forged in the fire of reactors, the thunder of rockets, and the silent rewriting of our own biological code.
The underlying belief here is that the universe rewards power, intelligence, and expansion. And for the first time, we are actively building the foundation of a true solar civilization.